teachers union itself, I don't believe it's like, that's a private entity, right? I don't think it's a government.
It's not officially a government union, but it's the federal law that basically requires the union laws is sort of complicated. I know in the private sector.
Here's something else, we've reacted to some clips of Destiny talking about unions in the past, and unfortunately, it seems like he has not been watching our videos that we clip and put out there, because he continues to have the same opinion about unions. And so, Destiny needs to watch the Valley Labor Report. I think it'll really help him out. But so far he has not, and he has on a bunch of different types of folks. And last week he had on Richard Hanania. And so Richard Hanania, I really don't know just that much about him, except for that he is an admitted former white supremacist, and currently a conservative, and like his shtick is kind of like, I'm a reasonable Republican kind of thing. Like, I criticize Trump, I don't like Trump, and I don't like the Democrats. And so that's kind of like his thing, but his politics are conservative, and he's not, he's not shy about that. So, at least there's that. He's not, trying to hide, a conservative policy preference behind attacking Trump, kind of like Liz Cheney, or, I don't know. Liz Cheney was never, anyway. So that's kind of his shtick. I'm a reasonable Republican. I don't like white supremacists. I don't like Trump, but I still have all of the same policies.
But nicer about it.
Yeah, I'm nicer about it. Yeah. And so he was on Destiny's stream last week, and he talked a little bit about unions. And so I just figured we would react to this, because he just straight up, like, he just doesn't understand what's going on with unions, like their structure, how they're set up, the legal justification for unions, or he just doesn't understand it. So I thought it would be fun to react. So let's play this clip from Richard Hanania.
The teachers' unions, I think, were a very malicious force here. There was, you'd read the New York Times and you'd read, Atlantic and so forth, and there would be reasonable people. I mean, I think the liberal consensus, like the elite liberal consensus, again, like the ones who publish for the most prestigious newspapers and magazines, they were like over school closures, like very early, even over like masking kids and stuff. It was just the teachers' unions who were like an interest group. Are they just responding to Trump and conservatives, or are they just like crazy people who just don't want to ever work?
Well,
and end up having control.
We can pause it there. Adam, former teachers union representative. Is that what's teachers? They just don't want to work. They hate their kids. They hate their community. I mean, that's kind of seems like at least one of, Hanania kind of put two options out there. Either they're like totally irrational and super negatively polarized against Republicans, and so they just knee-jerk, like, whatever Republicans are for, I'm against, or they hate kids and don't want to work and stuff like this. So this is, one of the two kind of equally weighed, possibilities here from Hanania about the reasons that teachers unions reacted to COVID the way that they did. So, what's your perspective there?
So I guess there's just no possibility that they looked at the fact that there was a pandemic and thought, man, it would be great if we protected our members. The educators, the folks who like keep the schools running, the teachers and librarians and bus drivers and cafeteria workers, all the education employees. Last I checked, they could get COVID, in fact. And so, if folks want to get mad about that, what happened years ago during the pandemic, the fact that teachers unions, in some cases, certainly not in all cases, but in some cases, in some states and cities, did push for remote schooling to protect their members and their students.
And their students' families.
Their students' families, right? I mean, a lot of people made a decision that certainly I think is a rational decision to look at the fact that there was a virus killing people and try to take protective measures against that.
Yeah, it's also, I thought about, initially I was going to say...
No teacher I know who actually did remote schooling enjoyed it, preferred it. They all hated it. It was miserable for them. Right. It was, yeah, I don't know any educator who actually, preferred that or enjoyed it. So it's, that's, I think, a lot of the bias showing there, just to assume that, yeah, either they're just crazy and like highly politicized, which is also hilarious. Like, you really think teachers' unions are out here mobilizing their members simply because they're loyal Democrats or something? Like, come on now. Like,
Yeah.
that's why the teachers are doing it? Give me a freaking break.
Yeah, and so I was about to say that this aspect of the fight has been memory hold, but really there was a very strong effort, I think, intentionally, to never allow this to actually be part of the conversation. But even when teachers unions were supportive of lockdowns and school closures, quote unquote, almost to a union, like, I cannot actually think of a single union that their position was school closures or nothing, right? The positions were actually, we want to reopen schools and reopen schools as soon as possible, but we have a few safety measures that we would like to see put in place in the classroom. So we would like to see, in particular, masks. We would like to see smaller classroom sizes. We would like to see increased investment in air ventilation and things like this. It was all, very, reasonable things as a response to a pandemic. And also, it just so happens would be good anyway to have better air ventilation. I mean, we talked to we have talked in the past to Michael Bailey, who is a air care kind of advocate locally, about some studies recently that have come out and showed that increasing air circulation by, I can't remember, some very modest amount, reduces the amount of sickness in schools by a very significant amount. I can't remember the numbers.
Basically,
but,
upgrading the HVAC and air filtration systems could cut illnesses by half or more, is my recollection.
Yeah, which is just like, I don't like being sick. Like, just in general, like, aside from, not wanting to die of COVID or whatever, I just don't like being sick. It's not fun. It makes you less productive. It takes away working days, and just all sorts of reasons it's not good. And so, a lot of the things that they were asking for are just good in general. Would be better for the teachers and students. And
that's the thing. Come at me with a program that the Chicago Teachers Union or anyone else pushed forward and show me how that was harmful for kids and families and communities.
Right.
And make your case. But otherwise, I agree with one of our commenters that it's just about trying to connect it to conservative right-wing culture war.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And not really in touch with the reality.
Yeah, for sure. So we got about 30 seconds in there. It's a 4-minute clip, so we're going to keep going.
So, for instance, when people are grilling farm,
who just don't want to ever work, and end up having control.
Yeah, this is another issue that I have too for the U.S. in general, is people don't seem to understand sometimes like what things are for and what countervailing forces should be for. So, for instance, when people are grilling pharmaceutical execs over like, did you raise the cost of this drug to make more money for your company? Like, you're demonizing this guy for performing his function. Like, they're supposed to make money. That's literally it. They're not here for the moral good of society. If you want to guide that, that's for government policy. Or when it comes to unions, people have this view of unions being like an intrinsically good thing, and it's like they're not. Unions are there to represent employees, and they're there to make the employees get paid more. So, like, whether or not a union is good or bad it carries no normative value. The same that a corporation doesn't carry any normative value. But people will look at like police unions are bad because they don't like police, or teachers unions are good because they defend teachers. And even with what you're saying there, like, well, the teachers unions were kind of crazy. They were just trying to get teachers to work as little as possible. I mean, that's what they're supposed to do, right? That's all. An employee is supposed to work as little as possible for the greatest compensation, and the employer is supposed to get as much work out of you for the least amount of compensation. But people normatively load these unions so much that it becomes like if you defend or oppose like the police union or the teachers union, you're either like a good or bad person. It's like, bro, it's just a union. It's just a collection of employees that are trying to get as much as they can,
So just we'll pause it there for a second. And, it's just bonkers to me to kind of compare the structural place in society of a CEO who is, killing or impoverishing people by, increasing the cost of medication, to a teachers union who, even if ultimately you come down on the side of they were asking for things that were actually detrimental to students. They weren't killing students, right? I mean, it's totally different kind of things. But there's a certain amount of truth there. Trying to, as a worker, you want to get the most amount from your employer for the least amount of work, and your employer wants the opposite. That's something that there's a certain amount of truth there.
There's a certain amount of truth there. And I stand with the workers because I am one, and so is the vast majority of this country and this planet. So to the extent that that's true, yes, there is something called class struggle, and it shapes everything around us, and I know which side I'm on.
Right. But, he just does not, like Destiny, you need to watch our videos because he does not understand that actually, unions do more than just represent their members. I think that ideologically, they should do more than just help their members. But I think structurally, you are actually just inclined to do more than help just your members because of the nature of what unionism is. I think structurally, it makes it easier and lends these organizations to a broader remit in society. Because if you buy the fundamental base logic of unionism, which is that we are stronger together, we can get more together, we are more powerful together. If you're able to buy that within your workplace, just structurally, by the nature of the way the organization is structured, you are more likely to recognize that logic in society. And so then you are able to, unions kind of force you to, in a union workplace, think beyond your individual atomized self and your own individual atomized well-being, right? It forces you to broaden your circle of concern. And so the act of broadening your circle of concern, I think, makes you more willing to do that generally in the population, right? And so I think there are structural reasons why that would make sense, that would be the case. And then I think actually you do see data that shows that is the case, right? Union members are more likely to vote for things that are good, in the community, more likely to raise wages, less likely to have racial antagonisms and be racist, more likely to be civic members of civically engaged people, more likely to volunteer for organizations and charities, more likely to donate, and then the effect of unions is good for even non-union employees, raises wages, increases competition in the, employment sector and all this kind of stuff. So he just fundamentally does not understand the role of unions in society. And it's very concerning because he has a huge audience, and it's a shame.
Yeah. Cause I don't really know who the hell either of these creeps are, but, the truth is that unions are working class institutions. We don't really have much of anything else like it in our society that is actually belongs to working people, right? These are institutions that are made up of workers. They belong to workers. They are run by workers democratically. Democracy varies from union to union, obviously. We talk about that a lot on this show. We talked about it this morning, right? With a union that needs some reform and needs more democracy. But that's unique. That is a unique thing. The fact that working class people have institutions of their own, which they can run democratically. It is not comparable to really anything else in our country that I can think of. So yeah, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of power in our society. To compare, it's just the CEO's job, right? Okay, there's some, like you said, some truth to that. So what you're admitting, though, is that there is this conflict. There is an antagonism between folks like CEOs and folks like the rest of us who work for CEOs or who have to consume based on the prices set by the CEOs. So it's not just some neutral thing that varies depending on context and situation. Now, I do want to comment on the police. There is a really fierce debate within the labor movement about police unions. I personally do not consider police unions to be labor unions. I do not consider them to be part of the labor movement. I do not believe that police officers are working class. That's my personal opinions. Folks are welcome to disagree with that. But I believe that their relationship to the owning class, to the ruling class, the rest of us and the working class, and their relationship to the economy is different fundamentally from a teacher, from a painter, from an auto worker, because their relationship is very different. They are literally guard dogs of the system. That is their role. That is what they are paid to do. And so they may culturally be very working class in terms of their background, education, culture. But personally, I do not consider police unions to be traditional labor unions, are part of our labor movement. I do not believe we should include them. I think it's very obvious. Every labor dispute, virtually every labor dispute in the history of our country, the police have been on the opposite side of the workers.
Except for Sid Hatfield, the one good cop in West Virginia.
Right. So, yeah, I did want to address that.
But he was assassinated, I think, if I remember correctly.
He was, yes. I want to address that. But so just a lot of nonsense, really.
But yeah, I mean, and that's kind of due to the structure of the thing, and you see that play out when other unions are attacked by the elite. The cops are kind of left out because there is an antagonism between the owning class and the working class in basically every other union except for cops. There's not really an antagonism between cops and the owning class, or at least it is much more submerged. And that's why, that's why their relationship to the rest of the labor movement is so strained at the very least. Like you said, they're basically always on the side of the company. And the biggest cop union in the country is explicitly antagonistic towards the rest of the labor movement, the FOP. I mean, they're not part of the AFL-CIO for a reason, and there are structural reasons for that. But okay, we're about to get to this part where Hanania just really goes off the rails in terms of, we've been talking kind of ideologically and like structurally what unions are, but there's this really funny legal argument that Hanania puts forward. That's one of the big reasons that I wanted to react to this, because it's just like
collection of employees are trying to get as much as they can, Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't be as blasé about it. I wouldn't say that, they're just doing what they're doing. They are a government. It's a government institution that is working against the rest of society. Now you have a legislature, they pass a law. They have to balance the teachers, they have to balance the kids, they have to balance the parents. They're supposed to, the taxpayer, they're balancing the interests of all society, right? You have one group of people that exercises power just over this one faction, which is the government itself. It's like the government trying to extract from the rest of society. So I think in a case like that, I think you can say,
well, careful, because the teachers union itself, I don't believe that's not like a government. Like the American Federation of Teachers, that's not that's a private entity, right? I don't think it's a government union.
Now listen to this.
Well, it's not officially a government union, but it's the federal law that basically requires the union law is sort of complicated. I know in the private sector, yeah, I haven't done the research on the public sector, but in the private sector, basically, they have a law where if the majority votes for unionization, they get to basically do what they basically get to negotiate on behalf of
he was about to say do whatever they want,
right? So it's a government thing where you can't just say screw you, union, go off, right? Like you have to deal with them because the government. I'm sure it's the same way.
Sure, there might be some favorable. Yeah, sure.
And they used to mandatory. They used to take out the dues. They stopped that. There was a Supreme Court case that stopped that. So, but at their heart, unions are they're either government institutions or they're facilitated by government. They wouldn't
really
they usually wouldn't exist otherwise.
Sure,
wouldn't exist otherwise.
Although on the other end, if it wasn't facilitated to some extent by government, then the argument would probably be that lack of unions are facilitated by government, because then every private corporation could necessarily just say no unioning, or we're going to literally just fire you. In which case, unions would never exist. And now people are like, okay, well, we don't have any kind of government like protection or sponsorship for a union. We're completely fucked, right?
Yeah, I mean, from a libertarian perspective, what defends the workers and gets them better wages and better conditions is the market is competition, right? So if somebody's screwing over their workers, they find a better environment. It's not a perfect system,
perfect. I mean,
but
it's not
it
perfect.
does create the right
It's
incentives.
pretty good.
Obviously, there's going to be power asymmetries. If you really are worried about that, I would prefer just giving people money directly, and then the balance is not so bad anymore if you have a universal basic income or some kind of means-tested welfare policy. Like, okay, but I think the competition is the best way to sort of determine, like, the distribution of labor and resources.
Okay, I think there are, if we go into that, I think we'll find it.
Hey, 5 seconds, just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Okay, so there was a lot there. I didn't want to stop it because we're coming close to the end. But there was a lot there that we have to respond to. And so just this legal theory that he was putting forward. Let's talk about that. So he was about to say, oh, the government mandates it, and then he was about to say it, but he said it in his head, and he was like, no, that doesn't sound right. And then he was like, I haven't done the research, and then he starts to say something else, and then he's like super confused,
Basically,
basically, as he was saying it, he realized, he was like, oh fuck, like I don't know anything, and I'm just saying, like I thought I knew, but now as I'm trying to say it, I don't know what's going on, so I'm just gonna kind of ramble my way through this, but so I think, and actually it's kind of funny that I got this message. Because I think this is where he was kind of talking about there's a government law that mandates teachers unions or something, and so somebody sent me a message on the TVLR Twitter that talked about how one part of Project 2025 is revoking the NEA's congressional charter. And so, and I looked into that, and this guy who was a good union member, but I don't think he understood it either. He was thinking that means that would destroy the NEA. But I looked into it, and actually it's just basically an endorsement from Congress of the NEA that was passed in like 1932 or something. I mean, it's like old, and it's the only union that has a congressional charter. And so that's kind of cool for the NEA that they have a congressional charter, but it doesn't actually affect it doesn't affect anything. It's symbolic. And so and actually Project 2025, if you read what they say about it, they say Congress should rescind the National Education Association's congressional charter and remove the false impression that federal taxpayers support the political activities of this special interest group. So they even recognize like this is a symbolic thing. We should get rid of it. But I think that last bit is kind of getting lost in some of the sauce for some folks. And I think that's what Hanania was talking about, but yeah, like he doesn't know anything about it, and he just saw a little bit of it, and he was like, oh yeah, it super sounds right that Congress made it a law that teachers unions have to exist. Like that's for sure what happened, and I'm not going to look into it any further at all. So I think that's what's going on there with that. And then he starts talking about, oh, the private sector is a little bit more complicated. They have 50%, and then you have to bargain with the union, and that's true. What he's talking about there is the National Labor Relations Act, which institutionalizes a labor relations regime in the United States where, yes, you do have a federally guaranteed right to organize, to have a union, to advocate for a union, and to a union election. And so if you do have a union election and you get 50% plus one, then yes, the employer does have to bargain with the union in good faith, quote unquote. But that's a very weak criteria, and actually pretty much the employer can actually just say, screw you, I'm not really dealing with you during negotiations. And we can see that by the fact that something like 50% of new unions do not have a first contract after a year of negotiations, a year out from their election win. 50%, and it's something like 40% don't have their first contract after 2 years, right? And so if it were the case that the government was coming in here and saying you've got to agree with the union if they get 50% plus one, we would not actually see that. We would see something much different. So a little bit, again, some kind of kernel of truth there, but fundamentally doesn't understand what he's talking about. And then finally, he talks about Janus. There he says something about, he doesn't know he's talking about Janus because, again, he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know anything about unions. But what he kind of put forward there was the idea that in the public sector, particularly in the federal sector, it was a law that all federal employees had to contribute part of their paycheck to unions as union dues. And it's like, that's not what happened. Before the Supreme Court case, Janus, it was legal for a union in the federal sector to bargain for union security clauses, which did mandate which do mandate that every employee in a bargaining unit pay union dues or agency fees as a condition of their employment. But it only allowed it. It did not mandate the agency agree to it, and it did not mandate that a union bargain for it. It's just allowed. It was not prohibited. Janus prohibited it. So there's like government going in there and telling you what you can and can't do in these negotiations. So again,
Right.
really doesn't understand that. So just on the legal front, I guess, before we start talking about going back into kind of theory and ideology as far as what protects employees, competition, does competition protect employees? Before we get to that, do you have any thoughts on the kind of super fundamental lack of understanding about the legal structure of unions in the United States?
Yeah, the thing that really, I guess, disappoints me is that apparently people listen to this, and they have audiences, and yeah, that's very frustrating that complete bullshit can be sold to people and who may not know. They genuinely may not know. I mean, I don't know why someone would be tuning in to this stream to learn about politics. But, for whoever, those souls out there who are doing that, I hate that they're being exposed to misinformation and from someone who clearly, I'm pretty sure I've forgotten more about unions than this brother ever knew. And, but that's probably for the best. I mean, because it's very obvious, he's not someone that aligns with the working class. And, whatever weird political transformations they've gone through, clearly they didn't educate themselves on, basic power in this society and how it works and how it's distributed.
Yeah, and so that goes into the thing about,
competition.
Competition.
I mean, you boil it down and most of these people are just social Darwinists.
Right.
They just believe in survival of the fittest. It's a dog-eat-dog world. You go out there. If you don't like your job, go find a better one. And, you can't find a better one? Well, then that's your own fault because you're just not good enough. You should have started a business. Wait, you need money to start a business? You're telling me you don't already have money? Well, that's your fault. You should have been bored with money. Okay? That's what, you scratch the surface, and ultimately a lot of people basically believe in social Darwinism and believe that whatever inequality we have in wealth and power is more or less justified and just the natural state of things, and any desire to upset that would be unnatural. And, you have a right to believe that, but I stand with the vast majority of people who are working people who are getting screwed and who have been getting screwed for a long time, particularly the last 5 decades in this country.
Yeah, and I mean the idea that competition is an adequate protection for workers is just so belied by American labor history, but also, global contemporary labor relations. You look at so many places across the globe that do not have real strong, the protections for organizing in America are not strong, but even less strong than us, than we have in the United States. it's really totally the idea that competition is an adequate protection is just totally belied by, reality. And Jacob Jones in the chat has a good, market argument for unions. And that's that unions are a response from the market that is in favor of workers. And if businesses try to stifle unions, then they're anti-free market. And Bill says that, it's basically freedom of association.
Right.
And that's
absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, if we are all rational actors in a marketplace, some of us will have the bright idea to band together,
right,
that will get a little bit more and can bargain for a little bit more in that capacity. Capitalists certainly do that. They collude all the time, right? So I also the whole thing about the government being involved and, yes, there is the National Labor Relations Act and there is this framework and there are certain protections, but as you pointed out, very weak, particularly compared to like Europe and other countries. But, it's not that unions didn't exist before FDR.
Yeah, unions actually, before the NLRA, there were more people in unions than there are today as a percentage of the workforce, right? But again, he doesn't know that. He doesn't know anything about unions. He's just talking about it.
Some politicians, such as FDR, and some elements of the ruling class had some common sense and foresight to say, it'd probably be better if we legalized some of this stuff and had an orderly framework rather than, every time there's a big strike, we have to call out militias and people are throwing bombs and people are dying.
Right.
Because that was, labor organizing was very bloody and violent in this country. Especially so in this country for many decades. Is that what some libertarians want to go back to? Because you think that suddenly people will, I don't know. I guess the idea is that, in this free market, we'll all be better off. But we've basically tried all this shit, and it was called the Gilded Age.
Right.
If it worked so great, we wouldn't have fought it in the first place. So
the last thing that I wanted to say on that was about the UBI situation, and I think that really, inadvertently, kind of gives away the game behind UBI, because if actually, you were just concerned about like workers having better working conditions or getting more money, you would at least not oppose unions, but certainly you would tend to be supportive of them. But instead of that, he would actually prefer just giving people more money so that they have a higher floor for for competition in the market. And look, it's not something that I necessarily oppose, but UBI is a fundamentally individualistic kind of welfare program, right? Or an individualistic solution to the problem of poverty and destitution,
to social
and
problems.
Unsafe working conditions, right?
It's an individual solution to social problems.
Because that goes back to the power argument, right? They do not want worker organizations. They do not want organizations of workers to have power in this society. They want to placate us and atomize us and individualize us so that we are not coming together and acting collectively, and because we have power collectively. I mean, if you talk about a UBI program that is any kind of meaningful, you are probably talking about more money going around in that way, certainly, than you would be talking about with just the wage premiums for union members, right? I mean, that's obviously the case. If you have a actual really meaningful UBI for the entirety of the United States, that's significantly more money we're talking about there than the wage premiums just for the small amount of union members, right? So that the idea that there are some even wealthy people that are for UBI and against unions, that gives away the game. It's not about money, it's about power. You do not have power as a UBI recipient, you have power as a union member. And that's why they don't want you to be a union member.
Right. Yeah, I think it is revealing that some folks among the elites are willing to pander to a UBI. I'll believe it when I see it, but they're willing to pander to it at least because, I don't think they see it as particularly threatening. And then I think also one of the other extensions to it is, well, we gave everyone a UBI. So now if you have a problem,
Right.
clearly that's your fault, right? We gave you the UBI. Why can't you take care of yourself? Why are you struggling? Why are you mentally ill? Why are you this or that? I think that's also part of it too.
Yeah.
It's going to be, well, everybody got their check. So, anything else, any other problems are clearly individual moral failures. And so that's, I think, a big part of it as well.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.